Last year, Rachel Notley was designated the most threatened Alberta premier in the province's history. Now, CBC News has learned just how grave some of those threats actually are. According to security documents, Notley has received at least 11 death threats as premier. For more on this story, I'm joined by the CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian in Edmonton. Hi there, thanks for being with us. Take us through these threats.
Well, Vashi, we got some 386 pages of documents from the Alberta Justice Ministry after filing an access to information request, including, yes, 11 death threats against Rachel Notley. She's been called a Nazi. She's had her picture defiled. In one particular case, an insurance firm contacted her office to let them know it had been flagged by a funeral home, which said it received a funeral application in Rachel Notley's name, completed and sent through the mail. In another message, Notley and the finance minister, Joe Ceci, were asked to be lined up in front of a firing squad.
Wow. Do you have any idea why Premier Notley specifically is a target?
We did speak to a political science professor about this, and according to her, there are a number of different factors at play. There's sexism involved. There is the prevalence of social media and how easy it's become to post threats. And then there's the particular context around Alberta's election in 2015. When the NDP came in, it was after a long time of Conservative rule. And I'll let you listen to what our expert has to say about that.
You can't keep a government in place for decades, which we are routinely doing in Alberta, and expect democracy and democratic norms to be robust and healthy. And so in this case, I see the people who are engaged in this, not only are they upset that their team is not in government, but I think they've actually withdrawn their consent to be governed by a party that they don't like.
So far, Notley's been relatively quiet about these threats, and Thomas says there could be a strategic reason for that. She may not want to make too much noise about them in order to not amplify them and not discourage more women from entering politics. Vashi?
Okay, thanks, Rafi. The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian in Edmonton. So how do politicians deal with these types of threats, and is there anything that can be done about it? Joining me now by FaceTime from Mississauga, Ontario, Liberal MP Iqra Khalid. And here with me in Ottawa, Marilyn Gladu is the Conservative health critic, and Sheila Malcolmson is the NDP's women's equality critic. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Ms. Gladu, why don't I start with you? I just want to go kind of around the table and get your reaction. I read this piece about the death threats leveled against Premier Notley. With kind of I mean, I knew there was a level of it, but I read it with my jaw kind of dropping. I wonder what your reaction is.
Well, I mean, it's not just unacceptable, it's illegal, but I'm sad to say it's not uncommon.
Really?
Yeah.
And yourself, Ms. Malcolmson?
Fortunately, this hasn't been a cost to me and my family of me being elected for now 14 years or so altogether. But I feel like I've just ducked it. I've been lucky. I've heard terrible stories from my colleagues, and we've had resignations over it even. Ministers provincially who have said, I'm out of this. I can't accept that this is part of the job, and neither should any of us.
What did you think reading the details of some of the threats that were leveled against Premier Notley specifically? I mean, a funeral application filled out with her name in it.
The efforts that some people are going to scare and intimidate women who have taken positions of power is appalling.
Ms. Khalid, what was your reaction reading the piece? And I know that you've been the target of a lot of that kind of thing too.
No, for sure. My heart really went out to the Premier because, as you all know, I've been in that situation, although not as threatening as Ms. Notley, but it's one where we must really band together as elected officials, regardless of which party stripe we come from, and recognize that most Canadians are not like that, and that it is a very small number that try to intimidate, that try to really target women that are in power.
And Ms. Gladu, what do you think about the idea? I tweeted the story, and a lot of the reaction I got was that this is sort of not just women, and I know other leaders like the Prime Minister, for example, lots of other men have received threats as well. But do you think there is something to the idea that women are targeted in a different way?
I think it's true that women are targeted in a different way. I would say that men are targeted as well, and it's unbelievable the nastiness of folks on social media. I know my own Twitter account and Facebook account had to be shut down at one point in time.
Really?
From the
What kind of
activity.
messages were you getting?
Oh, I mean, I can't even say them in the public realm. They were just hideous. And so it's disturbing to see that people in the public feel that they can do that to their representatives.
Ms. Malcolmson, do you think that women are targeted differently?
Because this is no longer just phone calls and emails and letters that we get as elected reps, but it's a completely transparent platform. We see that that people leave vile messages and violent messages on social media, and we are. I mean, of course, there's an amazing upside to being able to use social media as a communications tool, especially for us who are elected and far from home. But there's a attendant downside, which is horrifying. And I'm very concerned that because now anybody can see the violence and the pushback that elected people receive, and particularly women, that may well inhibit other women from moving forward and taking their rightful place at the table and in our parliaments and legislatures.
That's a really interesting point. Ms. Khalid, do you share that concern? Do you think that reading this kind of stuff and seeing what, in this example, Premier Notley is facing would prevent women from thinking it's a good idea to get into politics?
No, it's not easy to take that kind of lashback from the public. To put yourself out there in the first place, as you know, it's a lot more difficult for women to enter into public office to begin with, and to just convince themselves that they should be in this realm. And a lot of the hatred that I've seen in my own experience has been very gender based. And very personally targeted. I think, we definitely cannot condone this behavior. And I think that, in my experience, my colleagues, men and women and all genders alike, came together, banded together, and really put out that strong message that this is not okay. And I think that that's something that we need to keep doing more of when it comes to tackling these kind of issues.
Did it make a difference in your case? I remember that there was a lot of sort of publicity around the comments you got all around M103, but did you see a dying off of those comments, or because of the because of everyone sort of sticking up for you or saying things to fight it, did you see any change because of that?
Well, once the motion passed through the House, there was a significant decrease, but unfortunately, it still has not stopped. I receive very nasty messages on a very daily basis, but I think that the local police, the RCMP, my colleagues, they've all been very helpful in helping me to deal with this and to move forward.
Do they ever go as far as the ones that Premier Notley received? Like, do you get death threats?
During the motion, yes, we did, but we haven't, luckily, after that fact. But the Peel police have been excellent in keeping a very close eye on our office. We've had a few incidents of people walking in with video cameras and being a little threatening to my staff, but the police have been right on site.
Ms. Gladue, a couple of the other responses I got were, to the effect of they are elected officials. This is part of the job. This, not that you deserve it, but let's, sorry, this comes part and parcel. Do you think that's a valid thing to say?
No, I don't. I've heard the comment myself, but I think we're better than that. Can't we ascribe to a higher standard of professionalism? We're elected to represent people, and I think everyone is human. We're all doing our best. And while, criticism of topics and issues is one thing, I think the personal attacks really got to stop, and I think we have to call people to a higher standard and do what Ms. Khalid said, which is, band together and say this is unacceptable behavior, and try to work with social media platforms and organizations like that to do what we can to prevent this.
And that's, of course, what I want to ask you guys before we go. What can be done about it? What should be done about it? There are laws in the UK, for example. The Prime Minister there trying to make online intimidation of political candidates or politicians a criminal offence. She also talks about having to almost make it a liability or a legal liability for companies like Facebook and Twitter, et cetera. Do you think that we need to start looking at things like that, Ms. Khalid?
Well, Sheila and I were on Status of Women together studying violence against women and girls. And so we heard a lot of testimony from firms like Facebook in terms of what they can do to screen those things out. That said, I mean, the death threats that Rachel Notley received, those are against the law today.
Right.
What's the enforcement going to be on those 11 death threats? There should be 11 penalties to go with that, in my view.
That's a good point. What do you think can be done, Ms. Malcolmson?
One of the recommendations that 2 years ago Status of Women Committee made, on which Marilyn and I sat at that time, was to repair one of the damages that the Harper Conservative government did. They took out of the Canadian Human Rights Act a definition of discrimination which included online hate speech. I don't know why that would have been taken out at the time. It seems we need that protection so badly right now, 5 years later. So it was a unanimous recommendation of our committee to Liberal government to restore that definition of hate speech, that it could be online harassment and threats of violence. And that recommendation remains. The Trudeau government has not acted on it, and we wish they would.
Do you think that's something that the government should be looking at acting on, Ms. Khalid?
I think that our Status of Women Minister Monsef, is very much aware of this issue, and we've had a number of conversations about this specifically. I think first and foremost, we should not stay silent, and we should not be condoning this behavior with our silence. And secondly, I really think, and this was my experience during the whole M103 outcry, was that question between when does freedom of expression really infringe upon hate speech? I think that's something that we really need to study and really need to understand before we do take a step down that route.
Yeah, it's a really hard. We were thinking of that in the discussion this morning. You know, when does it go from just being sort of accepted that there are these mean comments on social media to something actionable like what we're seeing against the Premier? And how do you discern when that or how that even happens?
Well, I mean, the death threat is cut and dried illegal, but we did have, during the debates on some of the legislation that's come forward, we had Chris Biddle, the member from St. Catharines, who's a lawyer by trade, give us the definition. And he said that it crosses the line when it incites people to violence. So up until then, it can be offensive, it can be mean, but when it can be reasonably expected to cause people to act violently, then it's hate speech.
Tough stuff, but we'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, but a very interesting discussion that I think will continue for a while. Thank you so much to all of you for being with us. Appreciate
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.